This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. In this episode, I speak with Saul Kaplan about business innovation, creative cities, and making a minimum viable business model. Enjoy this episode. Hey, it's James Taylor. I'm delighted today to have Saul Kaplan. Saul Kaplan is a founder and chief catalyst of the Business Innovation Factory, or Biff, and author of The Business Model Innovation Factory, How to Stay Relevant When the World is Changing. Saul started Biff in 2005 with a mission to make transformation safer and easier to manage by helping institutions, leaders explore, test, and commercialize next practices and new business models in the real world. Their vision is to influence systems-level transformations in areas of high social importance, focusing on things like healthcare, education, and public services. And he is a genius, and I don't use that word lightly when it comes to innovation, and he's come highly recommended to come onto the show today. So Saul, welcome onto the show, first of all.
Hey James, great to be with you. I don't know about genius. I think that goes way too far. I'm an innovation junkie, though, that's for sure. I eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff, so I'm thrilled to talk with you about it and share with you all the black and blue marks we've gotten over the years on how you do make transformation safer and easier to manage.
So one of the things that you do, obviously, you work with quite large organizations on their innovation. And actually, when I mentioned that use that word genius there. So, today a lot of people think of as individuals being geniuses rather than organizations. But I know your background is actually working a lot with cities, in places like Rhode Island. And so there's the Latin phrase genius loci, that places themselves have their own genius. So when you got the call to start working on innovation and helping make somewhere like Rhode Island a more creative place, how did that start, and what were some of the successes from that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, Biff actually started when I founded it. I was in what I call my accidental bureaucrat phase. I had come out of a very long, emphasize long because I'm old, career in industry and in consulting. And then I made the mistake of trying to retire, and I raised my hand to become an accidental bureaucrat. I actually went into government, which I had successfully avoided throughout my whole career. And I led our state's economic development strategy and the organization responsible for implementing the strategy. And so I was an accidental bureaucrat. How do we turn an old Northeast economy that was literally at the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution here in America? You can actually go visit the old mill, Slater Mill, where you can see the very first mill that was automated that took know-how, stole know-how from your neck of the woods over in the UK and brought it over here, and they landed in Rhode Island. Anyway, the whole notion was we needed to transform the economy, not tweak it. And all the years I've been an innovation junkie, it seems to me that we're much better at the tweaking part than the transformation part. That we use all the buzzwords, and certainly innovation has become a buzzword. But what we talk about bold, think out of the box, transformational things. But then when you look at what actually happens, the best we seem to be able to muster are small incremental changes. So I've been a student of what does it actually mean to transform versus tweak, and how can you do it systematically? How do you make it safer and easier to manage? And I started in a community context here in Rhode Island. What do we need to do to change the way we think about our community and economy? What capabilities do we need to build in order to position ourselves as an innovator again? And how do we implement that? And so Biff was part of the solution to that. And then I left state government, and Biff was just a wonderful platform, lots of interest, not only in Rhode Island, but all over the country and even all over the world. And so for the last 12 plus years, we've been building out this platform, a set set of services to help institutional leaders, whether they're in the public sector, the private sector. How do we enable them with the tools to get ideas off of the whiteboard and onto the real world? So we can talk about what we've been doing over the last 12 years to do that.
So you often hear, whether it's politicians or CEOs, and a lot of the studies, when things like PricewaterhouseCoopers did a study recently, and I think Boston Consulting Group did one as well. And whenever they ask, senior C-level, C-suite executives, what are the most important strategic things for your organizations, creativity or innovation come up, usually in the top three. But then there's this disconnect because, things like I think Adobe did some research recently saying that only around about 39% of the population globally consider themselves creative or, think in that kind of way, or they identify in that kind of way. So that difference between maybe the people at the top of an organization or a country or a city and then everyone else, how do you bridge that? Because you're having to work in organizations with complex teams. It's much more complex than if you're just working one-on-one with an individual.
Yep. Well, the good news is that everyone's focused on innovation today. So you're absolutely right. I mean, everybody talks about it. Everyone puts it into their titles. Everyone runs conferences that are about innovation. Here's the problem. We've turned it into a buzzword, and we seem to only get tweaks out of the process. I just wrote a post, titled "So Many Innovation Labs, So Little Innovation." Every corporate, CEO has an innovation lab, but when you go visit them and look at what they're doing, how it's organized, how they provide incentives and resources to do the work, there's no surprise that we only get incremental change out of it, because it's a very different thing to organize around transformational change. So first thing we do is help leaders clarify what they mean by innovation, because I don't think it's either or. I think you have to do both things, right? I think you have to make what works today better every day, and you need to organize around that, but you also need to create the safe spaces and conditions, and you need different skills and different ways to make decisions and resource the work necessary to do something bolder. And so we focus a lot on what we call next practices and new business models, maybe even new business models that don't work the way the current one does, so that we could be proactive instead of waiting for all these disruptors out in the marketplace to wipe out our market opportunity or our entire industry. And we see that over and over and over again. And so today you have more leaders that are running institutions that are getting tired of seeing all these disruptors, right, take out their market opportunity, and are saying we need to organize to be proactive because we have the capability set and the resources to do it, but our current innovation approach isn't working. And so what we do here at Biff is try to help reframe that innovation conversation and provide some very specific methodologies and tools for how you organize explicitly around transformational goals and objectives.
So that the thing you were just talking about there, where many organizations, they recognize this big change, now we're seeing it with, I was listening to a thing earlier today just about transhumanism, how people like Elon Musk talking about how we're going to be using technology inside of our bodies and our biology as well. So you mentioned in the book that Blockbuster executives saw that Netflix was coming, and yet they stuck with their old model, even though they saw this new model coming. So how, so they must have understood that from an intellectual standpoint. Okay, this new thing is coming and we're in trouble. But what was the reason that they didn't make the change? Was it a cultural reason, or was it just something to do with just the bureaucracy of the organization?
I think it's a business model problem, because what you had, and that's a great example, right? You had Blockbusters, which was on top of their game, had completely redefined, the way we got access to movies and could watch them in the comfort of our own homes. What a beautiful value proposition. And the way they delivered on that in their business model was to create an incredible number and network of bricks and mortar outlets to do it. And so their entire organization, all the people, all the incentives, all the performance measurements were all based on how to do that better and better and better. And the problem is that you get locked in the straitjacket of your current business model, and you're constantly trying to protect it and make it better, which you should do. But what organizations don't do, and what Blockbusters didn't do, is they didn't create the conditions to combine capabilities in a different way to change the value equation with the customer. They could have done it, right? They saw it coming. They just were locked in their business model, and they didn't have a sandbox to be able to create new business models. And by the time they recognized it, Netflix was actually off to the races. The leaders of Netflix actually came down to the headquarters of Blockbusters, and said, "Why don't we partner?" And the big behemoth, Blockbusters, did what all behemoths do. Said, "We don't need you. We can do this ourselves." And they went on with adding more stores. And ultimately, Blockbusters got Netflixed. And then the last point of this story that I share in the book, and that I always share in talking with folks, is even Netflix has had to reimagine its business model. Because the truth is, how many people actually get their movies the way they did when Blockbusters was Netflixed? Almost everyone gets them online now. So Netflix had to reinvent its own business model. So the takeaway point here is exploring and testing new business models is now a strategic imperative. And if your innovation strategy and approach doesn't isolate that objective and organize around it, the best you're ever going to do is continue to strengthen and tweak your current business model, and you're going to be vulnerable to being Netflixed. And this is what leaders are frustrated by. They know they need to do it, but they don't have the tools and approaches and organizational structures to enable it. And that's what we do at Biff.
So, and one of the reasons that the Biff is brought into organizations is to help kind of facilitate that entire process. Where do you, because you're being brought in not just for the facilitation, but I'm guessing they're also bringing you in because you have your own ideas, and you're looking very widely at what's going on in the environment, and you're looking to in terms of from a futurist standpoint as well. There's those aspects there. So where do you go to get your new ideas? Yeah. Where do you go for inspiration to ensure that you're constantly on top of it and you can bring your A game to those meetings?
Well, everybody who wants to innovate, particularly people that want to do the bolder transformational work, they've got to hang out, and we hang out at the edge, right? Because where the knowledge flow is moving the fastest, where you can get exposed to new ideas and new capabilities and new approaches. We call it random collisions of unusual suspects, right? We hang out with too many usual suspects. We go to the same meetings. We go to industry conferences with the same people talking about the same solutions year in and year out. We should be hanging out with more unusual suspects. And what we do here at Biff is we create an environment where you can hang out with unusual suspects, and you can see the way it works in other industries, in other sectors, how we can learn from other disciplines. And we don't do this anywhere near enough. And if you really want to innovate, you've got to create the conditions for that. And we've been doing it here at Biff, and we help organizations learn how to do it too.
And I know from your backstory, one of the big launches that you were involved in terms of the strategy as well, was when you were Eli Lilly and Company, the big, huge pharmaceutical company. And I believe you were involved in the launch of the Prozac product as well. So obviously that's, everyone knows about Prozac now as the drug, and there's now other competitors obviously to that as well. But when you're sitting in that room and thinking about how to strategize in terms of for the launch itself, where do those conversations begin? Where does it start for you?
So I learned a lot from that. That stayed with me my entire career since then. I learned the difference between market making and share taking. So share taking is what most of us and most of our organizations do. It's the tweaking part, right? What industry do I play in? How does that industry work? What are the rules of the road? And how do I make sure that I can take share away from somebody else or protect my own share? There's nothing wrong with that, right? We learned, I have an MBA. I learned how to be a share taker, right? But I didn't learn how to be a market maker. The Prozac launch was my introduction to that, because we were introducing an entire new technology and product into an incredibly sleepy marketplace. I mean, we couldn't even talk about depression. Now we talk about mental well-being in a completely different way. Back then, when I launched Prozac, you couldn't even talk in the marketplace about mental illness and depression. What we did is introduced a whole new language and a way of thinking about that in the marketplace, and then offered a tool, a technology called Prozac, which added a lot of value for a lot of patients. And so this really stuck with me, the difference between market making and share taking. And I've been very interested, for the last 25 years in what does it mean to be a market maker versus a share taker? How do you get there? How do you become a market maker? How do you turn organizations into both share takers and market makers, so that you know that it's completely different how you do those two things, and you know the right time to pull on share taking levers, right, to drive scale of today's business model, but also learn the skill and tools of market making so that you don't get Netflixed. And so it really does all go back to that for me.
In the book as well, your latest book, you talk about the importance of storytelling and innovation. So something like Prozac, there's an example there of how the story changed about depression, mental illness as well, and things for that. But in the book, you talk about storytelling in terms of how to do storytelling a lot internally in the innovation process. So that word storytelling and innovation, they often don't feel like they're part of the same family.
Yeah.
What's your take on storytelling, and how do you work with that with clients?
Yeah, and they need to be part of the same same story. Excuse the pun. I learned this because if you want to do anything transformational, you've got to create an emotional connection, internally to the people in the organization that you're asking to change, or externally in the market because you're trying to introduce a new way for the market to work in order to change the value equation. And so if the goal is to create an emotional connection, you need storytelling to do that. I differentiate storytelling from what I grew up with, right, which was old school marketing, where I learned how to be a marketer that was more top-down push, control the message, wait until the message was perfect, and then launch it with a big bang and a press release and a big launch meeting. And today, storytelling doesn't work that way. It's messier than that. It's more organic. It's more bottom up. It's how do you engage people organically in the story and allow them to be part of the story? Because guess what? If people are part of the story and they can see themselves in it, they're a lot more likely to change. They're a lot more likely to tell their friends about what they're doing and invite them to play. And so I think we have to go from push marketing to pull storytelling. How do we engage both in our organizations and out in the marketplace? And what are the capabilities that you need in order to do that? Here at Biff, we've been on this learning curve for the last 12 plus years. How do you go from traditional marketing, to storytelling that reflects the new tools, the new social media platforms, the new way end users can engage in the process and customers can engage in the process? So this is part of how we built Biff, and this is part of how we help leaders do transformational work. And in order to do it, we have to bring our A game in terms of storytelling, and we have to help organizations become much better and more powerful storytellers.
That process of being then less push and more pull at Biff, did that come from just, was it an evolution of thinking, or was there a particular case with a client where it just, you had that kind of insight and said, okay, the game's changed. We need to be changing with it.
Well, a couple of thoughts here. First of all, the concept of from push to pull comes from a book, written, by John Hagel and John Seely Brown and Davidson, who really did a nice job of framing that. And I'm friendly with them, and they've been in our community, in and out, and attended summits for a long time. So I love that concept. Less push, more pull. And yes, we had to learn it over a number of years, because I think transformation is a generative act, not an analytic act. This is a huge difficult thing for a lot of leaders and organizations, to wrap their mind around, but they must. And you can analyze your way to incremental change, right? You can use spreadsheets and very tight financial controls because you're trying to make things more predictable. That's what incremental means, right? What are the best things for me to do, to spend money on, to spend time on that are predictable? And those are all the incremental things we do to be when we're a share taker. If you want to be a market maker and you want to transform a market, you can't use those tools. It's a generative thing. I borrow from the design world. We borrow from human-centered design, rapid prototyping, and storytelling as the superpowers necessary to do transformational things. You have to learn your way there. You have to build low-fidelity prototypes, see if it works, get better. That's very uncomfortable for large institutions that are used to doing more predictable things where you can, with great certainty, say what the return on investment is. I think to make transformation safer and easier to manage, you've got to learn how to do the more transformational things that don't work that way, and you've got to learn how to get out with concepts much faster, expose them to customer contact, see if they work. And then when you see that they work, then start worrying about scale and change management. The quickest way to kill innovation is to ask 80,000 questions about how an idea scales and what it takes to change an entire enterprise to work that way. You completely box out any discovery work when you do that. There's a right time for thinking about scaling and change management, but until you've actually demonstrated what I like to call a minimum viable business model. So you hear people talk about minimum viable products all the time. You need to expand that to think about minimum viable business model, right? And to take low prototypes of new business model ideas into the market, and don't worry so much about whether they scale initially. Figure out if they work at a small scale, and then if they do, now let's start asking the questions about scalability and change management.
It's a bit like that Seth Godin line about, in order to go big, go small. So you kind of start small, start and tweak and find out. Don't get too worried about the scaling issue. I was in Singapore recently speaking at a conference, and I was talking to someone there who was a previous consultant at the World Economic Forum, and he was talking to me about this change that's going on in some organizations now, where they're almost separating out the role of the CEO role and then this other type of role, and it's been given various different names, where they have one role who's in charge of the kind of the traditional business, the main core of the business. But then you have this other role, a little bit like maybe companies like 3M, whose primary responsibility is to ensure that all the projects that are going to be generating income in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years as well. With the organizations that you work for, is it possible for a CEO of a large organization to really manage both the existing business and everything, and all the distribution lines and product lines and everything that they have, as well as kind of taking those next steps and being much more transformative rather than just incremental?
Yeah, well, I love the question, and I go even a little step further. I'm amazed at how many CEOs today of very large corporations and institutions, right, are really doing the COO's job. They're focused on what's now, right? I thought that's what the COO was supposed to do. Like, focus on what's now, protect it, make it better, make it stronger, innovate within the context of today's business model. I believe the CEO should be all about what's next, right? And it should be the sponsor of what we're talking about now. The CEO should own it, right? And it should involve people from the core, right, as necessary to be able to manage a steady flow of projects from idea all the way through to market prototypes of entire new business models, even those that might disrupt the core. And this is hard, right? Because sometimes a transformational business model has to be able to cannibalize the core, right? If you look at what Steve Jobs did at Apple, he was a master at that, right? He had a business model, and then he would design a new one, and then he would put it with sheer will and muscle into the marketplace, and he didn't allow the folks in the core to stop him. And so this has to live at the CEO level, but yet you have too many CEOs that are still doing COO work.
But then what has happened with some of these larger companies that built these brands up over many, many years, and then you have a place I worked for a number of years in the kind of Silicon Valley world, and you have companies that Facebook say, move fast and break things. And so if you're moving fast and breaking things, then doesn't that not have perhaps an adverse effect on the brand? And do you have to work in that, once again, that storytelling in order to be able to win people over to the idea, listen, there's going to be some things that are going to break. There's going to be some things that we may upset some people, but unless we do that. But when that role, the CEO, is that the CEO's role, or do you have to have other people within the organization to ensure that there's some kind of brand protection as well?
Well, if I were organizing it, and as I advise leaders to do this, right, this is what I meant by you got to separate out the innovation agenda. If you're the COO and your job is to protect and strengthen today's business model, you need innovation capacity, right, to be able to do that. New products that can flow through the business model, strengthening the capabilities within the business model, making sure the culture, is aligned with that. That will not prevent you from being Netflixed. In addition to that, and this is where the CEO comes in, they should have a platform that takes the part of the innovation agenda that's about what's next, entire new sets of practices and new business models, and they should be doing the exploration work at a small scale of a number of projects that are designed to help them avoid being Netflixed. And yes, they should be doing that in the marketplace, and I think they should say proudly to the market, like, this is what we do. This is our business model today, and this is where we're doing our discovery work on what the next generation of our business model might look like. And at the appropriate time, when there are business models that emerge from that look like they're either should be replacements of the entire core, now you got a big change management challenge you have to organize around. But maybe it's a separate business, that lives in the corporate portfolio. Maybe you spin it out. Maybe you just learn from that and incorporate the learnings back in more incremental ways within the organization, or maybe it's all the above. But I find too many organizations that don't even put themselves in the position to make the choice. And what you end up with is, take the newspaper industry today. They waited way too long to understand. We all saw the same movie. We saw digital coming, right? Why didn't the incumbent industry act sooner? Why is it today, after they've been Netflixed or disrupted, are they now trying to figure out what they do with digital? If they had done it from a position of strength, they would have been in a much more powerful position. And I think leaders today have to do that while a business model is working, not when it's caving in. That's the time we should be exploring what's next. And it should be the CEO's job to do that in the context of entire new business models, and it should be the COO's job to do that in terms of incrementally making today's business model better.
So while we're talking about kind of digital and changes that's occurred as well, do you have for yourself, do you have any kind of online resources or tools or apps? If let's say if someone's listening to this just now, they run a business, small business, medium-sized business, large business, or non-profit. Are there any online resources out there that would be good places to go to learn how to perhaps get inspiration or how to think in a different way for this new economy that's coming?
Yes, a couple of different ways to do it. We leave a lot of digital crumbs, so we write a lot, and there's a lot of ways to access that on our website, businessinnovationfactory.com. We're all very active and prolific writers and bloggers. We are, if you go to that website, by the time you publish this podcast, you will be able to find and download a methodology to be able to design, prototype, test, and commercialize next practices and new business models, and we put it out there and share it openly. This is the way we do our project work with our clients, and so there's lots of ways to go up the curve. And then we also run a summit every year where people come from all over the world to be with a community of innovation junkies that are trying to go up this learning curve together and get exposed to more unusual suspects. It's a really incredible event, and you can learn a lot there too. So we make lots of ways to engage in the idea and to leverage the idea and the tools associated with it.
Wonderful. And we'll put all those links. So just people go to jamestaylor.me and just look for Saul Kaplan. You'll be able to get all these links here as well. So just switching tracks here a little bit, if you could just recommend one record, one album, and one book to our listeners, what would they be?
Oh my goodness! I hate these questions. Well, I've already mentioned, from push to pull, and so I really do like that book. I think it frames what's going on in the world today. That we live in the world that came through an industrial era that created an enormous amount of value around the world, and it was described as a push world. And we're now sitting in this messy transition to a pull world, and being able to think that way and organize that way and behave that way is really important. So I'll stick with that as the book. In terms of an album, and the kind of music that I like to listen to, I'm pretty eclectic about that. I'm old, so I'm a big Jackson Brown, James Taylor world. It kind of it settles me down when I get into one of my frenetic kind of moods, and I really like it from the standpoint of integrating music and storytelling, which is a great form of storytelling, into the way we think about transformation. Every year at our annual summit, we always integrate music into the format. We integrate art into the format. All the different creative endeavors that are different ways and platforms for storytelling.
And if someone hadn't heard of Jackson Brown and they want to get into his music, is there a particular album they should start with?
No. How about Running on Empty? Just because we're living in this world today that is, it's exhausting, right? Because we know we're at this inflection point, between these two worlds, and we're all threatened by it. And so I actually believe, that reinvention, whether it's personally or organizationally or in our communities, is the most important life skill. But yet, where do we learn to do it, right? Because we're going to have to constantly reinvent ourselves, our organizations and our communities. And so I really think that that's important. And every creative tool, that we have at our disposal to make us better storytellers and help us do that should be in our sandbox.
So final question for, let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch. You had to begin again. So all you have are the tools of your trade and the knowledge that you've acquired over the years, but you have no contacts, no one knows who you are. How would you restart?
Yeah, so it's a great way to end this discussion. I think we all have to get much better at reinvention. And so if you follow that logic through, we need to be working on reinvention every day, right? These people who call you, or organizations that call you, that wait until, they've been completely disrupted. I've lost my job and now I have to think about reinventing myself. That's not when you do it, right? You reinvent it yourself when you have a job. When things are good. And so when you ask me, if I had to start over again, I actually want to behave every day like I'm starting over again. Like that some parts of what I do, some part of it is looking out at what's next. So even here at Biff, where everything we've done is about how to make transformation safer and easier to use, we've got to prevent ourselves from falling in the same trap. So every year, we go through an exercise. What are are our next practices? What are the things we need to do that aren't part of today's business model that could potentially open up an entire new business model for us? What emerging technologies are available today to play with that we need to be thinking about, not just how to do what we do today a little bit better, but how we could do it in an entire new way. So when I hear people talking about artificial intelligence and virtual reality, just to name a couple, right? I look at that and say, yeah, maybe I can use some of that to make what we do today a little bit better. But I also, or in addition to that, want to say, what if those things were central and opened up opportunities for us to reinvent ourselves and change our entire value equation? And I think it's that yin and yang, that doing both of those things in the appropriate balance, that is the challenge of being a leader in the 21st century.
And finally, what's the best way for our listeners to connect with you, to learn more about Biff and the work that you're doing?
Yep. Well, businessinnovationfactory.com gets you access to the story, and you can peruse that and take that lots of different directions. I do a lot on social media, spend a lot of time on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at SKAP5, SCAP5, and I always welcome new folks engaging in the conversation that way. And so I welcome your audience into the community and look forward to engaging with them on the conversation.
Well, Saul, thanks so much for coming on the show today. It's been fascinating talking to you and just getting some of these ideas. I would love to have gone into some of these principles. I know you have this big thing called the Big Genome, these 15 principles for defining business model innovation. So if people want to learn about that, pick up a copy of the book as well, because it's got lots of details about that as well. Thank you so much, Saul. I wish you all the best with your business and with your upcoming summit as well.
Thank you, James. Great to talk with you today.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.